Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something really fascinating. We're going to demystify the actual mechanics of institutional integrity. You know, we constantly hear about ethics in government, in big corporations, in NGOs, but how do you actually bake it into the very DNA of an organization? How do we move past just sticking a core values poster on a break room wall and actually engineer those values into the daily operations that run our world? Well, that is exactly what we're going to decode today.
Here is our roadmap for the day. We are going to cover what ethical management actually is, the fallout when it goes missing, the big shift from traditional to modern values, and finally, the exact toolkit used to manage ethics today. Let's get started.
Okay, kicking things off with Section 1. What exactly is ethical management?
Look, ethical management is definitely not just some pie-in-the-sky academic theory. It is the active, deliberate inclusion of values into the everyday, routine operations of any agency or firm. It means recognizing that values are quite literally a core component of your institution. You have to actively inject ethics into every single step of the management process. Let me break down exactly what that looks like in practice.
So, if you've studied public administration, you're probably familiar with POSD Corp, the classic steps of management. But look at how we translate these into real ethical actions. When we're planning, we can't just plan for efficiency, we have to plan for inclusion and sustainability. Organizing, that has to be rooted in strict impartiality. And staffing needs to be based on rational rules, absolutely no favoritism. When leaders are directing, they need to do so democratically, and coordinating requires genuine sympathy and understanding between departments. Finally, reporting demands pure objectivity, and budgeting should literally be done behind a veil of ignorance, meaning you allocate resources fairly without any personal bias. That right there is the heartbeat of an ethical organization.
Moving to Section 2, the cost of missing ethics. What happens when this falls apart?
When an institution drops the ball on ethical management, the stakes are incredibly high. An institution can become completely obsessed with means orientation, meaning they focus so much on the bureaucratic rules and processes that they totally forget the actual outcome for the people they're supposed to be helping. You see the public service spirit just vanish. But the absolute worst impacts? The alienation of the weak and poor, deep moral corruption, and a pervasive toxic culture of secrecy. Think about the gravity of that. A lack of ethics doesn't just mean a government office runs slowly, it actively harms everyday citizens by shutting them out in the dark.
So let's jump into Section 3 and look at how our systems are evolving, the shift from traditional values. For over a century, the absolute gold standard for administration was Max Weber's traditional bureaucracy. And hey, it had some brilliant points. It heavily focused on neutrality, objectivity, and strict expertise. It was heavily rules-oriented, with a very clear, rigid hierarchy. But here is the catch. While that worked wonderfully for a slower, more predictable time in history, this highly rigid model is just incredibly inadequate for the lightning-fast, dynamic world we live in today. You can really see the massive tension here between the past and the present. The entire landscape of governance is fundamentally changing. Governments are shifting from being strict regulators to active facilitators. Think of agencies like CB, TriFed, or NABARD. The whole goal is shifting from simple regulation to driving actual development. Add in the explosion of IT in governance and the need for highly specialized technical administration, and you can easily see why a slow, inflexible bureaucracy simply can't keep up anymore. Because of this massive shift, we kind of have to play a game of keep versus toss. We absolutely have to toss out some of these traditional values because they just don't work anymore. Rigid procedural correctness, where an administrator cares more about perfectly ticking a box than actually solving a citizen's problem, has to go. Massive centralization that just creates endless bottlenecks? Toss it. And obviously, secrecy has zero place in a modern, transparent system.
But wait, scratch that idea that everything old is bad. We are definitely not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. There are timeless traditional values that are still profoundly relevant, and we've got to fiercely protect them. Honesty, impartiality, objectivity, nonpartisanship, these are completely non-negotiable. And crucially, empathy, legality, and a true dedication to public service remain the absolute bedrock. These are the core values that form the true spirit of governance, no matter how many supercomputers we introduce to the process.
This brings us right to Section 4, embracing new emerging values.
To actually tackle today's modern institutional challenges, we're seeing something really interesting. The public sector is borrowing straight from the private sector playbook. Institutions today need serious flexibility to adapt.
They need innovation and competition to drive better results. They need efficiency, team spirit, and, here is a wild one for a traditional bureaucrat, risk-taking. You just can't facilitate massive development projects and leverage complex IT networks without being willing to take calculated risks and innovate.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, Tools to Manage Ethics, the practical how-to.
Notice the clever little shift in phrasing here. Earlier, we talked about ethical management as the overall concept. This is the management of ethics. This is the actual tangible toolkit. It's the daily process of creating and using very specific tools and techniques to actively integrate those lofty values right into the conduct of the administration, the employees, and even the citizens. It is the enforcement mechanism.
And this brilliantly illustrates what that toolkit actually looks like in the real world. On the institutional side, you have the heavy hitters, the low-pol, super robust whistleblower protections to keep people safe when they call out corruption, strict codes of conduct, and parliamentary oversight. But look at the audit side. This is wild. Institutions aren't just doing boring financial or procedural audits anymore. They're being held accountable through performance audits, social audits, and even highly specialized green and gender audits. This is how you literally measure if an institution is practicing what it preaches.
But I do want to highlight one surprising yet absolutely crucial tool in this kit. It isn't all just about the stick. You need the carrot too. We have to actively reward ethical behavior. Positive reinforcement is a game changer. A perfect example of this is the celebration of Civil Services Day. Publicly recognizing, honoring, and rewarding those people who truly exemplify the spirit of public service is one of the most powerful ways to multiply ethical conduct across an entire massive institution.
So, why go through all this trouble to build and enforce this massive toolkit? Well, managing ethics effectively guarantees a few non-negotiable things. First, it ensures basic, everyday compliance. Second, it gives staff a real framework to resolve complex ethical dilemmas, because let's face it, the real world is almost never black and white. It enforces rigorous accountability. But above all else, the whole shebang protects the public interest. That is the ultimate goal.
We have seen today how institutions are actively shedding their old, rigid, bureaucratic skins and adopting these fast-paced private sector values like risk-taking and innovation. But it leaves us with a really provocative challenge to think about. As our institutions become incredibly technical, highly IT-driven, and focused on rapid facilitation, will our ethical tools, our audits, our whistleblower rules, our oversight, evolve fast enough to keep up and protect us? It is a fascinating race between innovation and integrity. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. I really hope this helped you see the hidden machinery of institutional ethics in a whole new light. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.